Well, welcome back. FEMA and the Iowa DNR were in town to talk about the new floodplain maps, and Cheryl caught up with Scott Ralston, the project lead from the Iowa DNR.
We have a rather large contingency here helping us. We're the Iowa Department of Natural Resources floodplain mapping program, but with us tonight we have a consultant, Vikram Shrivastava, and his company developed these preliminary firms, flood insurance rate maps. We have another consultant, Adam Bullerman, here from Snyder and Associates. He's a sub-consultant to Atkins Global, and he does a lot of the quality review and helps Vikram. We have a program specialist in the back, Ken Boma, and we have our GIS manager, Chris Colley, and then we have two individuals here from FEMA Region 7 in Kansas City, and they're insurance specialists. And this map shows the risk of flooding on the map. And it shows two particular events, the 1% annual chance flood and the 0.2 annual chance flood. The 1% annual chance flood is the 100-year flood, and that means it has a 1% chance of occurring once in 1 year. That also means that a 1% flood can happen multiple times in 1 year. It's just that the risk will be lower for that happening. So these maps are issued. These maps were issued September 30th of 2019. The maps were sent out. The hard copy maps were sent out to all the municipalities in Clay County, and then the Board of Supervisors for Clay County for the unincorporated areas. And there's a map repository in each city, and so the maps were sent out with a cover letter from FEMA explaining what the maps are. And the maps show basically two different zones. The A zone, which is the 1% annual chance special flood hazard area, and then the X zone, which is areas that are not colored at all on the maps. And those are considered minimal risk areas. The special flood hazard areas, or the 1% annual chance flood zones, are considered high risk areas. When we started our mapping program 10 years ago, the state legislature charged the DNR with mapping all 99 counties with new digital flood insurance rate maps, because we had 100% of the county was flown with LIDAR, and LIDAR is terrain data or topographic maps, and LIDAR stands for light detection and ranging. And that's where a plane flies over at 10,000 foot altitude, sends down beams of light, 200,000 beams per second. Those beams of light bounce off things that are on the ground, trees and houses, and then the ground, and you end up with a point cloud. And then the technicians at the aerial services company go in and they edit out all the noise or the information that we don't really need to have our bare earth digital elevation model. We want to get to the bare earth. We don't care about the trees. It actually picks up power lines and flocks of birds. Anything that light will bounce off of, it'll pick up. So we want that edited out, and we want to get to the bare earth. And so the accuracy of this LIDAR is extreme, plus or minus 4 to 8 inches, whereas the old maps that used to be used for flood insurance maps were 10-foot interval USGS quadrangle maps, and the accuracy on those is plus or minus 5 feet. So you've got plus or minus 5 feet, which is about my height, versus plus or minus 8 inches. And so with this real accurate terrain data for the whole state, the DNR, the state legislature wanted the DNR to map all the counties in Iowa, because these maps are much more accurate than the old way of doing things. So and the reason we're doing this is we had a $15 million HUD grant to start our program, and we hired the University of Iowa Flood Center to do the Zone A work the base level mapping in the state of Iowa. And we had a $15 million grant. In about 2016, we had spent all that money. So since 2016, we've been relying on FEMA grants. And so we're currently working on 47 of the 99 counties. We're taking those through the same process we're going through in Clay County here. In many of the counties up in this area of the state, all we had was paper maps from the 1970s and 1980s. Some areas were never even mapped. Now, that doesn't mean that there was no flood risk there. It just means that the flood risk was never identified on a map. So for a lot of these counties, this is the first time we've had maps that show the risk. The landscape really hasn't changed. We just never had the accuracy of the LiDAR before. Because you can go out and survey, but it's very expensive to survey and get the information. So we had all this information from airplane flights, going over. So the Little Sioux River coming down through here, this is one of the only Zone AE areas in the county. And that's the red crosshatch there that you see.
And what is that zone?
A Zone AE means that it's a detailed study. It means that there's hydrology that's done, and then there's hydraulics. And that's the engineering behind these maps. Hydrology is determining peak flow rates at different places along the flooding source, and that's in cubic feet per second. You figure out the hydrology from gauge data and regression equations, and once you've determined what the peak flow is, and obviously when you go downstream on the Little Sioux River, the further downstream you go, the higher the flow is because you're getting more drainage area as you go downstream. Those peak flow rates are put into a hydraulic model, and the hydraulic model determines the elevation of how high the water will go for that particular flow rate. So we did 8 different frequencies from the 2-year event, which is the 50% annual chance flood, all the way up to the 0.2% annual chance flood, which is the 500-year. So there's 8 different events that we modeled. 2 of those events are shown on these firms, the 100-year and the 500-year. So this area in southern Spencer, this shows this red cross-hatched area is the floodway. And the floodway is the area that's dedicated to convey the 100-year event without increasing the flood elevation more than a foot anywhere along there. The green areas, or the bluish green areas, are the floodway fringe, and this is the floodplain, and you can develop in the floodplain. You can't develop in the floodway. This is the area that's restricted so that 100-year flood will pass without increasing the elevation more than a foot anywhere. That assumes that the floodway fringes are all developed. The water can't convey in here. And then the brown areas are the 500-year 0.2 annual chance flood. Yeah, these areas in here are minimal flood risk. The brown area is the 0.2% annual chance flood plain. And then the areas that aren't colored at all, that's called X zone, and those are areas of minimal risk as well. And then these other areas, like I said, the green areas are the special flood hazard area, or the 100-year flood zone. And that's where flood insurance purchase is mandatory if you have a mortgage backed by the federal government, which are all Freddie Mae and mortgages, or Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, all those mortgages that a typical bank would issue. It could be that you're in the floodplain for the first time, and that means if you have a federal mortgage backed by the federal government, you'll have to buy flood insurance. Yeah, the mortgage company or the lender will contact you as soon as the maps become effective. And these maps, like I said, these are preliminary maps that we're discussing tonight. And they were issued September 30th of 2019. But those maps, about 2 years from now, will become effective in July of 2021. Those maps will become effective. And when the maps become effective is when the lending institutions start sending out letters informing the mortgage holder that they now have to buy flood insurance. The preliminary maps come out and they're issued to all the community officials. And then there's a 30-day comment period. Now, this was 2 months ago that these maps were issued. So it took 2 months for us to get these meetings scheduled because we're doing 46 other counties right now, for one reason. But then after this meeting tonight, then several things have to happen, and the things that have to happen in order for the maps to become effective are by federal law. They're statutory requirements. One is the Flood Hazard Determination Notice, FHD, and that's a notice that has to be published in the Federal Register. Until that happens, nothing else can happen. So when that takes about 3 months for the the flood hazard determination to be developed and reviewed and approved, and then it gets published. And then there's 2 legal notices that need to be published in local newspapers that have coverage in the whole county. And when that second legal notice is published is the beginning of an appeal period. And that's a 90-day appeal period. It's exactly 90 days. It is not 89 days, it's not 91 days, it's 90 days. And that's an opportunity, it's called due process. And it's an opportunity if somebody wants to challenge the validity of the flood insurance zones, they can do that. They have the legal right to do that, but they have to pay for an engineering analysis to be done. And that engineering analysis needs to be sealed by a professional engineer in the state of Iowa. Has to be submitted to the city. The city needs to evaluate it. The city passes it along to FEMA within that 90-day period. And then our consultant who prepared the maps will review that appeal for its technical merit. And then there's an appeal resolution period that lasts a couple months. And then during this time, there's quality reviews that happen at the federal level on these maps. And then there's a letter of final determination that's issued. And that's after all the quality review checks have happened. And when that LFD letter is issued, and again, those go to every city and the county. And when that LFD is issued, 6 months from the date of that letter is when the maps become effective. And that again, that would be early July of 2021 is the projected effective date of the maps. That 6-month compliance period between the LFD being issued and the maps becoming effective, that's called a compliance period. And one reason for that 6-month period, and all pens are up, I mean, there's no more changes to the maps during that 6-month period. The maps are considered final, that's why it's called an LFD, a letter of final determination. And during that 6-month period, we have program planners who help each of the cities update their ordinances. Now, some cities never participated in the NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program. You can join the NFIP as a city without paying anything. But in order to be in the NFIP, you have to have a local floodplain ordinance, which basically references the maps. And if you weren't in the program before and there was no map, you had nothing really to define your flood risk. So during that 6-month compliance period, the floodplain ordinances are either written, developed, or updated. You can go to www.iowafloodmaps.org and you can view your flood information on there. And again, those are not the effective maps, those are the preliminary maps. There's another website, and you can get this from the city of Spencer, or any city or the county. And it's called the National Flood Hazard Layer. And you can go there and look at the effective maps. Those are the maps that are effective today. And if your area was never mapped, it won't be on that map.
Steve Hallgren stopped into the studio to talk about what is next for citizens of Spencer affected by the new floodplain map.
First, what I'd like to touch on is just recap last week a little bit. So last week on December 11th, the city had what was called a CCO, a coordination consultation officer meeting, and that was held by the Iowa DNR and FEMA, and it was held at the county administration building. That meeting went really, really well. I spoke with the officials after the meeting. They were very happy with the turnout in Clay County. We had almost 20 people show up to the local officials meeting in the afternoon, and that evening there was just short of 40 people that showed up, and that was primarily all residents and property owners in town, and that was set up as an open house format where they could come in and sit down one-on-one with FEMA officials and DNR officials and talk about floodplain concerns and get clarifications on the maps and insurance. And so they were happy with the turnout at that open house, and it went really well. There was a lot of good information that was disseminated that day from that meeting. As a follow-up to that meeting directly, we've gotten the presentation materials from that meeting, the local government meeting in the afternoon, and the city is going to be putting that PowerPoint presentation on our city website. So there's a lot of great information on there about the NFIP insurance program, some upcoming time frames, and information going forward. And that information will be made available on the city's website.
Okay. So next, for those citizens that are affected, they take a look at the maps, they have questions, they contact you?
Correct, absolutely. Nope, that's certainly what we would encourage people to do. Our office has been busy this last week as a result of the media and the paper and the radio leading up to the meeting, and then also after the meeting. So we've been fielding a lot of phone calls. We've had several people stop in our office looking at the new maps. And it's been going well. It's just an education process for the individual homeowners. They're obviously mostly concerned just with their property and how it affects their property. And so there's great resource maps available online. I would certainly encourage anybody out there, if you have access to a computer, you can go directly to iowafloodcenter.org. And it's a really easy site to navigate. It brings up the state of Iowa, and there's a drop-down box, and you click on that, and it'll bring up a list of all the counties, and you just highlight Clay, and that will zoom you right into Clay County, and then from there you can just use the zoom features on your computer to literally zoom into your exact house, and it will bring up the 100-year floodplain, the 500-year floodplain, and the floodway zones in Spencer and Clay County. And that's a really good resource. But if anybody has additional questions or would like to come in and sit down and talk with us, we're always available for the general public, 8 to 5 daily. And we have resources in our office. We have all the current paper maps that are the proposed new maps. We also have the existing map, which has a current effective date of April 1983.
Oh, wow.
And right, so up until these new maps being published, those are the maps that we're utilizing. But some people have been interested in actually corresponding the existing floodplain map with the new maps and seeing how those overlap and how they work and the different shifts in the floodplains. So we have those resources available if anybody would like to come in and take a look at those.
All right. So I've looked at my property, and I'm not sure I should be in this floodplain.
Right.
Is there a way that I can, argue that?
Excellent question. Excellent question. Yep, that came out of last week's meeting with the DNR and FEMA. And this meeting last week was just one step in a multi-step process to get to a completed map. And the next steps moving forward is going to be FEMA finalizing the preliminary maps. We're expecting that to happen within the next 90 days. So we don't have a set date yet, but that's an estimated time frame. At that point, which would put us at about maybe mid-March or so, the city is going to be expecting a formalized letter from FEMA saying this is the start of your statutory 90-day appeal period. And that appeal period is set by Congress. There's no waiver on that. And that is your 90 days to issue an appeal if you want to appeal a decision on those new revised maps. At the end of that, they're going to go in and continue with final revisions And ultimately, what we're being told is the new effective dates of the final published maps could be as far out as June or July of 21.
Okay.
So we're still in that transition period, and we will be all through this next coming year as well. So for people actually looking to build or do additions on their houses, from a legal standpoint, when we're issuing floodplain permits within the city of Spencer, we'll actually still look at that current effective map. We can look at the new map as an advisory going forward, but we're under the authority of the current effective map until the new map takes effect.
Okay. So if I do want to appeal, I can't just write, can I just write a letter to say, hey, I don't agree with this, or do I have to have some hard facts?
Right, so another good question. With that going forward, what we're being told from FEMA is the appeal needs to be in some type of data format or engineering documentation to substantiate your appeal. So to answer your question, no, somebody can't just write an email or a letter saying, I disagree with your map. I wish it was that easy,
Yeah.
but they would be inundated with letters and emails. So what we're being told from the city is all appeals must come into the city first, and then the city will actually review all of the appeals, and then the city as a whole will collectively provide those to the Iowa DNR before the end of the 90-day period.
Okay.
So that 90 days will be shortened up a little bit just to give staff final time to review all of the appeals coming in and then provide that information before the end of the comment period.
Okay.
And along those lines, we already are working in-house collectively as staff in the planning department. We've noted several properties in town right now that are in conflict, and we're doing our due diligence as staff in providing the supporting documentation. So a couple examples of like what I could tell you is there's properties that have been built recently and may be located in the floodplain. But when they built in accordance with a floodplain permit issued to them. So they've elevated the building out of the floodplain. An example is if you look at a couple of new commercial buildings on South Grand Avenue, you've noticed that they've been elevated to a higher level than the parking lots or the streets surrounding them. That was done intentionally to elevate them out of the floodplain. However, since those are newer construction, the data used in support of these new maps is almost 5-6 years old when they shot the original aerial photography. So they're showing those properties as still being within the 100-year floodplain. But the information we can collect from the floodplain permits issued, along with the survey data from an engineer showing that the base elevation of the property is at X elevation, we can get those changed out to the benefit of the property owners.
Okay.
So that's one of the things staff is working on now.
All right. We do have a floodplain ordinance. Obviously, you've mentioned that a little bit about when you do your permits and that kind of stuff.
Correct.
So there is something on the books already, so this isn't a surprise that these are going to change. or
No,
anything.
absolutely. The city of Spencer has had a floodplain ordinance for many years, and the one of the provisions of my job and through our department is the city's floodplain manager. So what that means is we take a look at permits that come in to build. We cross-reference those with the floodplain, and if anybody wants to build in the floodplain, then we have to go through and follow the floodplain management ordinance and comply with that before we build structures, primarily occupiable structures. So we're talking about residences and businesses and such. So with that, the basic premise to be able to build is just about two choices: is either elevating the building out of the floodplain or flood-proofing the building somehow. So the most common and most cost-effective is to elevate out. By ordinance in the city of Spencer, your lowest occupiable floor elevation needs to be 1 foot higher than the 100-year floodplain elevation.
Okay.
So we can provide supporting documentation to residences and businesses in town of what the base elevation is, the base flood elevation, and then they in turn provide that to their contractors, builders, and then they note to set the mark 1 foot above that when they build.
Okay. So all kinds of moving parts that go on into all this. So I suppose if folks have questions, you're the person to talk to before they even get started on looking at a site maybe, or?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a good working relationship with our department with realtors in town, realtors, lenders, and individual property owners. There was an instance here just in the last couple of weeks, a property came up for sale, and we received many phone calls asking if it was in the floodplain and such. And so we routinely answer calls about that, whether properties are within the 500-year floodplain, 100-year floodplain, what they can build, how they can build, the process to go through it. We're certainly glad to work with, like I said, either lenders, realtors, or interested homeowners on any questions they might have.
All right. And the next process basically on the new floodplain maps is just have folks come in and take a look and make sure that they understand where their house or their residence is.
Yeah, we are aligning the old floodplain map with the new floodplain map. And we're going to be going through and cataloging all of the properties into a couple different categories. So one is any property that is currently within a 100-year floodplain that might be removed from that floodplain by a shift in the floodplain. We're identifying those, and we're going to send letters to all those property owners. How does that benefit them? Well, it's a benefit to them because they may be paying a flood insurance policy on their house right now. And we owe it to them, as residents in our community, to notify them that they could contact their lender or mortgage holder and say, hey, I'm being taken out of the floodplain. I don't need insurance anymore. On the other hand, there's going to be properties in Spencer that have not been in a floodplain and will now be identified in a 100-year floodplain. We're going to go through and we're cataloging every one of those houses in Spencer, and we're going to notify them from the planning department as well, and just give them a due notice that says you previously were not in a floodplain. Now FEMA has decided that you're going to be in a 100-year floodplain. Here are your options going forward. You'll need to investigate into the NFIP insurance program. Yep,
All right.
those we anticipate those letters to probably go out shortly after the first of the year.
Okay.
We really appreciate you inviting the department down to visit about the floodplain stuff. It's kind of been the topic in the forefront for the past couple months, floating around our department, and you know, we feel it's gathered a lot of attention, just like I said, in the last couple of weeks specifically. So I would just reiterate again, if anybody has any questions at all, any concerns, or just want additional information about the maps, please contact our office. We'll be more than glad to sit down with you one-on-one and help you interpret the maps and let you know specifically for sure if you are in or out of the floodplain.
All right. Well, great. Well, thanks for coming in today, and
Very welcome.
have a Merry Christmas.
You too, absolutely. Merry Christmas to you.